sound like Trump.
It's
Why
just
she
that-
gotta choose Trump?
It's just
The
because
only
they're-
people in the red tie with the white suit.
You look like you going up for election. I know. You ain't got no orange skin.
And you can start whenever you get ready. Okay. Thank you. She bring me food. Well, let's do
Oh, I forgot. Oh, this one.
Yeah. Yes, I did. Yes, Gunji. I like your little jewelry. Hey. Hey. Thank you. I do what I can. I do what I can.
I'll be there. You guys, so you guys are up anyway. All right, well, hope everybody had a good break, holiday, whatever you want to call it. Welcome to our final presentations for the semester, if you can believe that. Thank you all for being here. I do apologize for the minor difference or the typo in the dates, but of course, I wasn't going to make you present on Friday. So, we will just be doing our final presentations. As we discussed, you have your 10 minutes or so. It is broadcast, so we may have people from, or we will have people from UNC, and potentially some of your faculty advisors may be watching online as well. And everybody will be evaluating you, of course, according to the criteria that were outlined in the instruction. So basically those same things that I said in terms of define your market, disease state analysis, et cetera, that's what we're going to be evaluating you on. It's out of 100 points. And this is into our semester. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to our first group and take it away. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Andrea Dixon.
Sienna Collett. Oluchi Ozuzu.
And this is our final presentation, and our company or group is called Aspire.
So for our needs statement, we needed a device to develop an individual self-information area device that has a CO2 sensor that can be used for outstanding intervention in situations such as combat or anything that might not be ideal with the presence of blood and secretion.
So with the needs statement and our problem when it was given to us, there were different problem statements that we had to come up with. There are two different categories that we decided to go with. There's intubation in general and there's intubation within combat. So intubation in general has some complications or discrepancies, meaning that most intubation cannot be performed in hostile environments. Intubation correctly has to be done by people that have been trained as doctors or physicians. Another problem is the fact that the operator cannot see themselves when they use this. So in the need statement, they said they needed something that was a self-intubation tube. So in general, there are intubation tubes that are out there, but in our case, they want something that will be self-given or self-driven. Another problem in intubation in general is the fact that there's a need for equipment. So like we said, an intubation is usually done in hospital settings, most sterile settings. Whereas for our needs statement, they need something that is in a more hostile environment that has such things as blood or secretions around them. The last thing about intubation would be anthropometry, which is just the difference in the size of organs or parts of the body. In particular, it will be the trachea for us. So in most cases, women and children have smaller tracheas than most men or grown men will have. So that's a problem to take into consideration. More in general with our project at hand, intubation within combat. So within combat, there are still problems with intubation, but for the military or the Department of Defense, intubation requires anesthesia. So that would be something that would be definitely a problem to adjust to, especially while you're at war or in the battlefield. And then the other problem is not knowing where intubation will take place. So the problem statement was given to us, the need statement was given to us, and it didn't specify whether there will be within the combat, like actually after they get injured, they have to be rushed into like the medical tent or something like that. So we need to specify or either pick which problem that would be. So because of this, we came up with a central problem statement that kind of entails all of those problems in general. And it says intubation requires the use of medical attendants within the mobile army, surgical hospital during battle. So because of this, there needs to be a way to adhere to each and every one of these problem statements, and we just picked the central one to show you all.
For limitations, for the criteria and the constraints. For our criteria, the intubation process must not be longer than 30 seconds. The reason for that being is that you're in a combat setting, and you can't be seen, nor could you be stationary long enough for someone that your enemies can see you. For the second criteria, the entire intubation kit cannot weigh more than 1 pound. The other intubation kits that are out there weigh between 0.5 and 1.5 pounds. I looked at previous research and saw that for the combat soldiers' gear, they have to meet a certain weight criteria. And we figured that if it weighs in between what's already out there, it shouldn't go over that number of weight that a soldier gear can have. For the third criteria point, the intubation tube itself must physically have markings on it, so the person that's performing intubation on themselves will know how far to go. Because of because of your trachea being so flexible and so sensitive, you can actually hemorrhage with the intubation tube, because while you're doing intubation on yourself, your trachea actually moves. So you don't want to damage it or actually puncture it or actually disattach it from your throat. It must not, like I said before with the third point, it kind of goes hand in hand with the tube cannot be longer than 23 centimeters in length, because the 23 centimeters in length is actually the max for a man's trachea depth. For the constraints, of course, it must be self-intubating. For the second one, and must detect CO2 level. For the third constraint, it must be in the presence of fluid and secretions, as stated before. And for the last constraint, must be able to perform in low light environments, because when you're in the battlefield, you're not able to just turn on any light, especially when you're out in the open and you're trying to do a low light ops in the battlefield.
So for anatomy and physiology, we focus on the trachea because we're supposed to be developing a endotracheal intubation device. So the trachea is also known as the windpipe, and it is located underneath the larynx or your voice box. And it's made up of cartilage, and it's about 20 rings, and it's about 4 inches long and less than 1 inch thick in diameter, even though it sort of varies depending on the person and the sex, but that's just sort of like a general approximation of your trachea. And so that's pretty much what these 2 bullets are, more in depth. So in war zones, severe damage can come to the throat region in general, which results in like distorted anatomy or a torn or injured trachea, which then impairs the user to be able to use the intubation device if they can't clearly see, or if the anatomy is not where it's supposed to be during that time. There is no required testing or diagnostic phase because we aren't actually doing the disease. But we do know that the presence of fluid and distorted anatomy sort of affects how effective or how efficient the intubation process goes. Usually, the only thing we saw out there as far as intubation in battlefields or in the war, it's usually performed on people that are unconscious already, and it's not generally used. And it's not generally used. You don't generally do it to yourself. There's someone that helps you out with that. And for economic impact, these stats are based on the 2017 budget, but it's just roughly the amount of money the military spends with the injured, their health programs, and in medical training, which may be required for the self-intubation device.
So for our stakeholders, we just provided a chart showing the people that we should keep satisfied, manage closely, monitor, or keep informed. I guess the people that we'll be targeting the most would be the people of high power and high interest, would be our customers and clinician. The Department of Defense and the customers. Department of Defense primarily because it gives us our funding and our instruction on how we need to do certain things. And customers because they will be the people in the Army or the battle who will be using this in general.
So for our market, we decided that the total would be everyone who's of the age of 18 because those are people who would probably be able to intubate themselves. Our service available would be the Department of the Defense because that's who we're serving. And then the target market we thought would be about 15% of the active duty members in the Department of Defense, which is approximately 255,000 people. And we were thinking just 1 unit per person.
These are references. Any questions?
Thank you. I'll open the floor for questions. Questions? Okay. So thank you for the presentation and congratulations on the progress that you made thus far, especially considering change. Let's look at your criteria and your constraints for a little bit, please. So by definition, what are our criteria? What are they supposed to specify?
We're supposed to specify the
So
limitation.
Well, constraints are the
Oh,
limitation.
my bad, yeah. So the criteria specifies what it it should do. And the constraints are the limitation.
The constraints are like the measurable values or like the actual numbers that you put that go along with the criteria. So essentially, this should be flipped around.
Okay, right, yeah. That was one of the big things. And then when we talk about like levels of CO2 detection and just you want to, as you refine these, be sure that you make them testable. Right? So how are you going to know that that one option is better than the other at detecting CO2 levels? Is there a threshold that you need? Which way do you want to go with that? Right? So be very careful about those. We're really going to want to refine those as soon as we can. Okay. Who did you actually talk to, or where were your information sources when it came to kind of your stakeholders and what they want, what they need, what the market size was? Where did those things come from?
For our stakeholders, since we just had our different project title, we haven't been able to reach out to our clinician. We just figured it would be the fact that the people that would need it in general, which would be the active duty military members. And then on top of that, since the DoD is the one who provided us with this information and the grant, so then we would be in contact with them as well. So those people we're looking at.
So from an engineering standpoint, how would you solve the problem? Let's say the clinician that's currently assigned from the Department of Defense never reaches out to you. How do you get around that? Because you got to find something, and you can't say, oh, they didn't reach out to us, so we don't have stakeholder input. So how would you get around that? Who else, how would you address the situation of not talking to, the clinician from the DoD? Who else could you reach out to get stakeholder input?
Well, I think that we would like talk with our advisor and maybe try to find someone else, maybe around campus or at the UNC campus that is, that may have military information that could provide us with the same sort of guidance and background information that we need.
Who on campus could you talk to that would have potentially some of this background military experience or information?
Maybe Dr. Ethan now.
Okay.
Veterans.
Yeah.
Veterans, absolutely. ROTC, right? We have attachments on campus. Yeah. Good. Other questions? Thank you very much. Okay.
That's right. Just let me graduate, please. This okay?
What website is
Hold on, just a second.
Oh, he about to come in here.
We not even chunk.
Yeah.
They good as hell. I don't know why y'all scared of that man. What did you do? Kick him out?
He will.
Okay.
You gonna say stuff like this as soon as he comes.
All right, okay. Ready?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Shannon Mitchell,
Alexis Martin.
Max DeLeon.
and we are the replacement makers.
This is just a little bit of background about skin. Skin has 3 layers: the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. To my top right is the image of the volar forearm. B is the image of the dorsal forearm, and C is the image of the palm. Where D represents the different measurements of thickness in skin.
And then in reference to mannequins, they have different mannequins that are used for different uses, including CPR, IV insertion, chest tube insertion, and then just airway inhalation. For most hospitals and simulation centers, there are replacement skins that are used on the actual mannequin, and they are changed 2 to 3 times a day. There's replaced every session 2 to 3 times a day. Excuse me.
And then here's our general problem statement. So the medical mannequins used today do not act as realistic simulation of the model procedure. Instead, they are used solely to just to give the layout of how the procedure is actually given. So the feel and the actual how it looks is not really the main target for each of the mannequins.
And for our needs statement, there are very few models where the skin of the dummies closely mimic of the human skin. So the medical training dummies, there are a need for dummies that possess the realistic skin. That's pretty much our goal, to do what feel like and look like.
So thus far, we have contacted a student nurse who is at Emory, our clinician, Dr. Benny Joyner, the Wake Forest School of Medicine Patient Simulations Laboratory, the Barber Center for Plastic Surgery, and Cone Health Surgical Simulation Center. And from talking to some of them, as they say, they lack realisticness compared to when doing it doing it actually on a human person. So the look and the feel and the density of the person's skin.
Okay, so stakeholder analysis. As you will see, in the future, we will have a chart laying this all out. So we talk to healthcare facilities, also clinicians, and also different nursing and medical students, especially ones here we're also talking to at A&T in the nursing program. And then if you go to the next slide, you'll see how we lay them out on the stakeholder analysis. The medical students are and hospital simulation labs are our main targets for who we really want to care about and make sure that this product is for them. And then Dr. Joyner and our clinician, Dr. C, also would be looked at. The information would be analyzed and just make sure that we get their input as well going forward. And then we would, lastly, we would have a low support. The insurance we would use to actually make our project, but it wouldn't be our main target to, I guess, to please them.
For our regulations, this is just something that I found from the NCBI. And for skin regulations, FDA regulates product commonly referred to as skin substitutes under 4 categories. This is just for skin grafts and the biomaterial that we're supposed to be making this cell culture friendly.
Other regulations in terms of just mannequin-based, for CPR-based mannequins, the American Red Cross puts out their own regulations, which include regulations for adult, children, and infant mannequins. The first 2 bullets for the adult mannequins are for also the child and the infant. The only difference between the adult mannequins, the child mannequins, and the infant mannequins is they must realistically represent the size of the child, the infant, and the adult. And then the infant must also have arms and legs. But they also start to explain the durable construction, because the main mannequin, outside of like the replacement parts that you put your mouth on and things like that, or like change out, have to be consistent and they have to be durable to withstand the use of multiple times. So they're saying it needs to be 125 student uses with 328,125 compressions and 21,875 ventilations. And then it must also contain no latex in any part of it.
And here, so this is 5 main IP that we actually found amongst the many other ones that we looked at. But here you can see a list of, for example, a skin graft product. basically to give us an understanding of how we would actually create the synthetic skin, for example. And then another one, I think it's at the very bottom, is actually training mannequin to see the different specifications and the objectives of each of the training modules to give us a better idea of how to go about making our new product compatible with products that are already out there.
For our design constraints, we found that the stiffness control fluctuates between 0.42 MPa and 0.85 MPa. It can't be more than the cadaver price of 110. It cannot be hard to apply to the synthetic skin of the mannequin. The adhesive cannot affect the longevity of the mannequin.
And then the design criteria was that it must be biocompatible because we're using it for human skin cells as well. It must be composed of a porous material because our skin is porous, so it needs to be as realistic to our skin as possible. It must match within 90% of elasticity measured from the cadaver skin, and it must be adaptable to other medical procedures and cell culture friendly. Here are our references and questions.
Questions? Getting mine together here. Just a second. Okay, so thank you for your presentation and as well as for your work on the topic so far. So I'm a little bit, what I'd like you to do is kind of restate some things because I heard cadaver skin was thrown around, and then I heard cell culture, and then I see mannequins for CPR, and then general mannequins, and they're all not fitting together. So can you kind of state for me succinctly what is it you're mostly trying to do? Are you trying to tackle something using cell culture as a potential alternative, or are we doing mannequins for CPR, or are we doing cadaver skin?
So we have a phase 1 and a phase 2 of our project.
Okay.
Phase 1 being mainly what's in this class, and then phase 2 being mainly the Dr. C's portion of the project. So our phase 1 is to develop artificial skin for a training mannequin. We are still determining what exact part. Right now, we're just making like a regular square of skin until further research is done in communication with Dr. Joyner to figure out if it's going to be chest tubes, if it's just going to be a basic part of the face for a CPR mannequin. And then our phase 2 is to make sure that the skin that we make is cell culture friendly, so that the skin that is used can also be used for researching topical procedures, so in drug testing.
Okay. And so in terms of the things related to your current market segment and stakeholder, was this focused on phase 1 or phase 2?
Phase 1.
Phase 1. Okay. And so I don't know if, let's go back to the map that you put up there. Okay. So not for this one, but in terms of like the regulations and the IP stuff that you found, is that phase 1 and phase 2?
Yes.
All right. So I think probably what we'll have to be sure that we do in the future is that we're real clear about what goes into phase 1 and what goes into phase 2, because I have a bit of an advantage because I've been talking to you all, but we're probably going to get a lot of questions from Chapel Hill and your write-up about kind of what's going on, and even there might be, they didn't ask you, but there might be some questions about what's going on in the what. So you want to be real clear, even when you think about like the medical device testing and that continuum. If you have very clear milestones, then you put everything in phase 1 to group that together so that we're clear about what you're trying to do, and then group all your stuff for phase 2 and make that very clear. And even if they're going at the same time, kind of separate them a little bit for us. Okay, so do you have any when you think about, especially for phase one, when it comes to developing this kind of skin for dummies, are there any ethical concerns that you have or things that you need to consider?
So in terms of ethics for this, some people don't like use of animals being used in medical procedures. And right now, there are a lot of pig skins being used and cow hides and things like that being used. So that can cause some ethical concerns. And so for us, it's looking at what people are doing now and trying to figure out how we can fix those ethical concerns to not use animal products to make it a little bit better.
And can you tell me a little bit about why what you found, or why is it so important for dummies? So again, phase one, for dummies to have realistic skin that has a similar material property to, I guess, to real skin.
So usually when medical students like nurses, for example, make the transition from dummy to actual patient, the patient is usually the first time with actually getting the actual how something feels, how the procedure feels, but they're going off with a procedure that they have built on the mannequin. So it's not like they know like this feels right or whatnot, but they just go off the procedure and that's it. So by having the feel of the mannequins, we can decrease that gap, that knowledge gap between the mannequin and actual patient.
So are you saying that your skin is going to provide like feedback to the clinician when they're practicing to say you're doing this right, or?
So it has the same feel like of the actual skin.
Okay.
The feedback would be, I guess, how it actually like when they're doing the procedure, how it actually feels right there and then to get that.
Do you remember what that's called? That type of feedback?
Haptic.
Proprioception, haptic feedback. Okay. And then, let me see. Can you go back to your criteria constraints real quick? Oh, so for constraints, when you say stiffness control fluctuate between 0.42 and 0.85 megapascals, clarify that for me. So you're saying
It's like the modulus of elasticity of skin. So like how much it stretches, and then the stiffness control. That was something I found in the paper.
So what is stiffness control? What do you mean by stiffness control? Are you saying that you're only going to allow it to go between 0.42 and 0.85?
Yes. And
Okay.
that's with Instron test of just stretching out like the phase one of what we're doing.
Okay.
With the skin.
All right. So we want the Young's modulus essentially to be between 0.42 and 0.85. And then I guess there was constraints was another criteria. Okay, here we go. Thank you. So again, this is going to be one of the ones where you got to separate phase one, phase two, because I'm sure cell culture friendly is not a phase one thing, right?
Right, that's phase two.
Okay. And then porous material is phase one or phase two?
That's phase two. It's kind of both, but we're trying to make what phase two just really deals with the cell culture.
Okay.
Whatever we make for phase one is just going to be continued on to be used for phase two. And that's where we had to limit what materials we ordered for our order sheet, because there's other materials that could be used for phase one, but if we're using them for phase one and having to remake a whole nother product for phase two, that kind of defeats the purpose.
Well, I think one of the things you want to be careful about is if your gold standard is elasticity, you want that to match. Porosity may or may not exactly fit into that, right? So it may not be a porous material, but it'll be within your confines of your elasticity, modulus of elasticity. Whereas if there is, and if that's the major feedback that you're concerned about is the elasticity, that's kind of gets the most weight. But if it's something, where porous material is important because you're talking about influx and efflux, ingress, egress of fluids in the skin, or you want to monitor sweating or something like that, then that's maybe something you want to throw in the criteria. Definitely once you get into phase two, then, we can maybe include that, but, it'll be helpful when you just separate them. Okay. Other questions? Thank you very much. Ryan's closing us out today. I'll let her choose this out. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamel Sylvester,
I'm Jonathan Holland.
and we're doing alternatives to dialysis.
So our original needs statement, we were saying developing countries, but we wanted to narrow that down to a specific country. So we had 3 must-haves that a country must have. First, it must not be a hostile region. It has to have, basically it has to have like a good market for kidney disease, and Taiwan fit our criteria. So the problem that we observed was that the cost of dialysis plays too much of a role or has a negative impact on the economy of Taiwan, with the cost of the PD solution making up about 52% of the total cost of dialysis. So we decided that maybe we would design something to reduce the cost of the PD solution.
So for the needs statement, we decided to do for the Taiwanese government, there's a need to reduce the cost of the continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis, CAPD treatment.
The market, so we're targeting the 7,210 patients in Taiwan that are on PD, but that only amounts for a small percentage of the 70,000 patients who are on dialysis in Taiwan, which is only about 3.3% of the 2 million patients in Taiwan who have kidney disease or need dialysis. So the thing about our device is that it's going to be able to target not just Taiwan, but other countries as well, because even developed countries such as the United States have issues with the cost of kidney disease treatments.
So some of the challenges that we incurred when we were just throughout this entire process is implementing and deciding the rates for choosing our country, which we listed in the first slide, and then brainstorming solutions to improve peritoneal dialysis, narrowing down our problem statement because it was really broad initially because we were looking at all different countries and regions, and then deciding on preventative versus treatment approach to the problem on alternative dialysis. And then lastly, deciding on how the team will profit because we are in a developing country.
So just some of the disease state analysis, especially anatomy and physiology of kidney disease. Well, the kidneys is that it's the filter of the body. It filters the blood and removes the toxins from the body. And the pathophysiology, kidney disease basically affects the ability for the kidney to filter the blood, and then in turn results in the body becoming toxic due to excess salts and things that should be excreted through the urine. And some of the stages, there's 5 stages that are in the kidney disease, and each of them have assigned threshold for the GFR, which is the general flow rate. And some of the numbers are like a normal stage, or someone that's not affected is around 90 milliliters per minute. And like, let's say the end stage is 15, so it's a big, I say gap between the GFR that says that you have kidney disease or not. Some of the effects is that it can make the body toxic, can cause swelling in the lower body, and also scarring within the kidneys. Epidemiology, the cause can be either hereditary, environmental things, which was a big one in Taiwan. We think it might have to do with it being an island and the area that it's in. There's a lot of, I say like a small gene pool, because a lot of people don't go off the island, and not a lot of people come onto it, so it's kind of like isolated. And also like acute injury in that area can cause it. And the economic impact is basically the country of Taiwan has a reimbursement system for dialysis, which is around 100%. They give, like, none of the cost is to the patient, depending on where the patient goes. So if the hospital the patient goes to meets the criteria for Taiwan's government, the government will pay for the cost of the dialysis wholly. But where we come into a problem is if, like, there's a whole lot of dialysis patients, the government has a set budget per year, and sometimes they don't meet that budget each year, so it ends up causing them more out of pocket, or the hospital themselves.
including stakeholders we have is the Taiwanese National Health Insurance, or the NIH. And they are under the Taiwanese Ministry of Health because they're the individuals that actually reimburse, and they're the ones who are bearing the most burden of the cost of dialysis. We also have the patients, nephrologists, and then public sector tertiary hospitals, because those are where a lot of the specialists and clinicians are.
Some of the regulations that are in Taiwan and for our group in general is the NIH, which is National Health Institute. Taiwan's Ministry of Health and Welfare, which oversees everything that's done with dialysis in that country. The FDA is something that we have to look about in our country. And the classification of our device is a third-class device, which means it's high risk. And we think we fit in the category of a 510K because it's a predicated devices of hemodialysis, dialyzer, and IVC filters, because we're more concerned about possibly filtering the solution than creating a whole new dialysis machine itself, which is why we see it as a 510K and not a PMA.
So some of the existing solutions that are already out there is the CCPD, which is a continuous cycler assisted peritoneal dialysis, and that's just basically using a machine, and that's the more common one in the United States. And then the continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis, and that's using gravity to help you do the exchanges by hand, which is what we're focusing on.
Some of the design constraints, which are measurable for us, it must reduce the annual volume of PD solution by 50%. It must reduce the annual cost of PD solution by 75%. Must have a 50% minimum retention rate of the initial PD fluid. Must meet current Taiwan Ministry of Health and Welfare and NIH standards. Must be biocompatible and must allow 15% of the kidney's flow rate or a GFR of 15. And some of the design criteria, it must be able to operate at home, must be a cheaper option than the current peritoneal dialysis, and it also must be user-friendly.
And these are our references.
Thank you. Questions? Thank you, Dr. Batterai, for joining us. Let's see. Questions, comments?
Did y'all pick y'all country?
Yes.
I missed your first part of the talk. What's the reason that Taiwan you selected? Taiwan government?
We had a kind of a vague problem statement initially, so we were just trying to find a better solution for dialysis, and for better wasn't even, I guess, what made it better. Like, there was no requirements, so we specifically decided to focus on reducing the cost, and we're also specifically looking at developing countries. And there's a lot of developing countries in the world, and so we each broke it up by region. We each had a continent, and we did a lot of research, and then we talked to a clinician, and she gave us a lot of insight. And then based on our research, because Taiwan has such a high population of people who are on dialysis, and the government helped in offsetting the cost for each patient, it seemed like there was already a lot of data, and it would be easy to implement our product there.
You go to your, let's start with your constraints real quick. So as you kind of refine these and move forward, so I do like that you have numbers, and that's going to make it feasible to test. One of the things you may want to look at, though, is when you say biocompatible, be a little bit more specific, because we know nothing is 100% bio. So what are you talking about in terms of biocompatibility? Is that the interface in the arm, or is it the blood in general, or and what level are you talking about? And then some people could even argue that when you talk about 50% minimum retention rate, that's also a criteria in terms of performance metric that you want it to actually do. So that might be one that you want to refine a little more, or it's actually pretty good as it is. It just may be more criteria. And let's go to your criteria real quick. So for some of these, when you look at how you're going to measure this, that's something you want to keep in mind. And we talk about user-centered design, so of course user friendliness is something that you want to consider, but in the back of your mind, hopefully you have some Likert scale or some idea about how you're going to determine user friendliness and how you're going to test for that. And then be sure to, have some ideas in terms of cost and be able to put a number up there besides cheaper than current devices. And even the operate at home user friendliness, that kind of can arguably go hand in hand. So you may want to really be looking at, from a criteria standpoint, again, what are some of the more performance-based things that we want to put on the criteria slide as opposed to a constraint? What is it that it's going to do? What's the measure that I'm going to put on the bench top and say I'm going to run the fluid through, and if it gives me this much filtration, if it does it this fast, or those kinds of things are what you want to be thinking about. For yours, I know this might be a bit of a challenge, but when you look at your particular stakeholders in terms of talk to, can you go back to that slide? Yeah. So what's kind of your additional plans for customer discovery, voice of customer stuff, considering complications of this stakeholder list?
I was gonna probably try to use like a form that like attorneys form for the PD patients and see if I can maybe get a response on there, maybe communicate like electronically.
To patients in Taiwan?
Yeah, either patients on Taiwan or I know they have like doctors forms over there too, like we do some of those for our research. But some of them are kind of old, like from 2017 or 16, so maybe they're not as active, but try to get in contact with them that way it's over there.
Yeah, and since our clinician is like a nephrologist, maybe we could interact with her and see if there's any patients who are willing to just kind of give us some feedback, and we could get voice of a customer maybe that way through our clinician.
But I don't think we would have to like limit ourselves to only communicate with someone in Taiwan because PD is like almost a universal thing. So they probably have like universal problems that maybe we can contact with someone that's over here.
And from what you've seen, what are some of the ethical or even cultural things that you have to keep in mind when you're talking about this kind of procedure in Taiwan specifically?
Yeah, we're looking possibly at like the disposal of the fluid and how they would handle stuff over there. Maybe how you would sterilize stuff in home if you're administering it to yourself.
Also, the older population, they actually prefer to be in clinic and get treated by somebody as opposed to treating themselves. So that's something else to consideration.
I'm sorry, we're gonna add.
No,
Other questions? Thank you also for your presentation, for your work thus far. All right, so we've got round one in the books. Thank you all very much for your attendance, even though I made you be here. See you Wednesday, same time, and the order, like you saw, is on the Blackboard submission thing, so we'll kind of go with that as close as possible. Just as a heads up, everybody hasn't submitted their course evaluations. They are due December 2nd.
Mine's done.
Dr. McCullough, so you said for our project we should divide it up into phase 1 and phase 2. Does that mean that we need 2 needs statements and 2
So you said we need 2 of all that.
And so really
So should we be presenting on both phases then? Or do you want us to?
I want you to focus on phase 1.
Because he wants us to have data by February for his phase 2. And that's why I'm saying.
I like phase 2, but it's just not phase 2.
Yeah, definitely. I want you to focus on getting phase 1 done. That's my main.
Because he's saying that can be done tomorrow. Outside of like your like okay like researching this stuff, he's like go in my lab, we can do this tomorrow. like, this is quick and easy. And I guess that's what we're trying to like say, like, yes, it can be done. So his thing is, because that can be done tomorrow, y'all need to start working on this other part.
Snitch on them. Snitch on them.
We not snitching on nobody, we just trying to make sure our grade don't.
Stakeholders and stuff like that, 'cause we don't do that much research on that. We're doing more research on like how to do this project with him in the cell culture friendly biomaterial.
Right.
And it's not a research project, it's like a design project.
The phase 2?
No.
Phase 1.
Phase 1 is, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's our grade.
Right. So, yeah, I see what you're saying.
So that's why we kind of like put everything together, because
Yeah. Because we're trying to please everybody. That's what that
because
project
like
is.
he's saying, like, you can really do that quick.
Gotcha. Well, so you still got a final report to submit.
Yeah, we started that based off of what we had on.
Everything
That's why I'd
together.
asked you if we need to separate
It
everything.
needs to be separate. This final report for this semester and next semester, when I'm grading, I need to see the design process from phase 1 all the way through. And all the proper background, market segmentation, disease statements,
Right.
concept, decision matrices, all that stuff.
So for the disease state, because there's not really a disease, like, it's a general thing, you still need us to do a disease state analysis?
So I think one of the things for you all that you need to think about is you're not necessarily addressing a disease per se, but it is a physiological thing. You know, skin has a certain physiology. There's an elasticity to it. There's a porosity. There's a temperature. There's all these kinds of things about skin that you may or may not be considering for your replacement, right? So as a part of the background, you need that in there to show that you understand skin, right? It may not necessarily be everything that you incorporate into your design, but hey, I'm proving to you, Dr. McCullough, that we know skin as much as we could within 5 months.
So is that basically as the background on skin, basically? Okay, so just more in depth what we. Okay.
Correct.
But we wouldn't label it disease state analysis.
So I guess
It would still be disease state analysis.
I guess then the other question is, so we put this order sheet in for all this stuff that we need for him.
Okay.
So like, do we just stick with that? Like, because there's other materials that can be used, but they're just not materials that are going to work for phase 2.
How much was that budget on what you guys submitted?
Like 100, 200.
So, I mean, I would say, go ahead and leave. I mean, I'm not gonna take points off or anything. I will go ahead and order it. But if you don't use it until phase 2, don't worry about it.
But the thing is, I guess the whole thing is, I guess as of right now, we're saying we're still doing phase 2. Because if we're still doing phase 2, we need those materials.
Okay.
Because it makes no sense to buy EcoFlex when EcoFlex, he already says, does not work for his phase 2.
Okay.
Only
Phase
So
1.
it's
phase 1.
okay. So yeah, I mean, if you're
EcoFlex has the same like
elasticity in its
that we
pores.
need, but it doesn't work for. He already says he knows it doesn't work for the cell culture.
for phase 2, is that so? So you're asking, should you order it or not?
Well, I'm saying so we are right now going to stick with phase 2 because I guess that's the question. Like, are we sticking with phase 2?
Can we do phase 2 outside of the class then?
Well, that's what he's saying is supposed to be done outside of class. But like I'm saying, Doctor, he wants us to have research. He wants us to make an abstract for him and have data for him by February because he wants us to go do biomaterials research and work on a second one of this.
All right, so I'll have another conversation with him. Essentially it does need to stick where phase 2 isn't outside of. Really, it can be in class, but phase 1 has to be done first, right? And so according to timeline, if we don't get the phase 1 stuff done, then phase 2 can't start. And if you can't do the research, then you can't do the research. And
because the only thing I could think him saying is, well, y'all need to get all this stuff done during break. So by the time y'all get that, we can do phase 1 end of January and his part of phase 2.